bank, JP Chase, and he's been a pillar of Wall Street for decades. We caught up with him a few days ago in Baltimore, and among other things, we asked him about America's position in a tumultuous global economy. This moment we are in feels like a transition point, an inflection point, and I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
America is the most prosperous nation the world's ever seen. Our basic principles of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, are unbelievable. The innovation is unparalleled anywhere around the world. So start with that. It's an amazing position of strength. The economy is going through a bunch of things, and we don't always really know whether you have a mild recession or hard recession. And if it happens, we're going to be fine. I feel terrible for people who lose jobs. We want to keep it as short as possible. I do think you're right about a turning point, but that turning point is about geopolitics. That's about Ukraine, oil, Russia, war, migration, food, national security, China, trade, that whole bucket of things. And I put in that category quantitative tightening, which is basically reducing liquidity in the banking system of the world. That is actually, forget us for a second, it could be very difficult, high dollar, the dollar going up, higher rates, and quantitative tightening on smaller countries around the world.
The World Bank and the IMF have been warning about this for a while.
And so I'm saying you got to put that whole mix in what's happening in geopolitics. Ukraine is a turning point where, maybe all this sort of self-illusion that we had that somehow the world's at peace and everything will be fine, that should have been shattered. And therefore we should be thinking about how can America do great in the next 100 years? What policies should we have?
When I looked at your last shareholder letter, which I know you take a direct role in writing.
I write every word.
Well, it was April.
I get help, but I write every word.
Everyone goes through a process in thinking through these things. And when you ranked some of the things worrying you, Ukraine was right up there with all the domestic issues. That was right after the war started. Now we're at a point where some would look and say, okay, it wasn't the worst case scenario in Europe in terms of severe recession. They're finding ways to get oil and gas elsewhere. Do you think in the same way now as you did then in terms of risk?
I think even more so.
Really?
And that's a false sense of security that you've had this war going on, for 9 months or whatever, and that somehow it's okay. Oil prices went way up. Europe's going through a recession. Migration has been extraordinary. You haven't seen the full effect of food prices around the world. If you go to Europe, they're taking this much more seriously than Americans are. They're on the front line. You have those missiles going to Poland. You have basically nuclear blackmail. I mean, it is as serious as you can get. So we should all hope it goes away, that there's some kind of armistice or settlement. That's good for Ukraine, by the way. The danger of this war is extraordinary, and it can go on for years. But this oil and gas thing, it looks like the Europeans will get through it this winter. But this oil and gas problem is going to go on for years. So if I was in the government or anywhere else, I'd say I have to prepare for getting much worse. I hope it doesn't, but I would definitely be preparing for it to get much worse.
What does that look like to you in terms of what should be prepared for on the energy front?
On the energy front, we need secure, reliable, cheap oil and gas. The problem, a lot of people think that oil and gas prices being high is good for CO2. It's not. So cheap, reliable. You're looking at Germany. I mean, the Europeans are terrified. Their energy prices are 2, 3, 4, 5 times ours, which is hurting consumers, which the governments have to do something about, and it's hurting businesses. And it's just started. And so the pain and suffering can get a lot worse. So, it has the benefit, lower prices have the benefit of having more production. Okay, they have the benefit of helping poor nations, lower income individuals, our allies who are desperate for more secure energy, and CO2, because quite predictably, carbon emissions, carbon emissions are going up because nations, rich and poor around the world, are turning back on their coal plants. They cannot afford expensive energy, and they can't afford no energy. So, to me, to solve climate, we kind of need all the above: permitting, plans. Gas is the best and cleanest way to reduce coal, which is the best way to reduce CO2. So, really thoughtful policy, comprehensive policy will get us there. But it also is military policy, economic policy, including trade. So when I say economic, I'm talking about, trade is one thing, but economic is investment rights. So anything that relates to national security will have to be changed.
President Biden has called it Putin's price spike, but he's also blamed price inflation on corporate profits. And I know this irritates you. you've argued energy costs are not high because of price gouging, but because of the dramatic decline in investments in energy, which results in reduced supply when demand goes up. So if that's true, what is it going to take to increase lending to companies so they can make those investments?
This is a little more complicated now because part of it is the companies don't want to do it.
Why?
Well, part of it is people talk about excise profit tax. That's one. They can't get permits done. They can't get leasing and stuff like that. And part of it is their investors are putting a lot of pressure on them.
To go green.
To go green, but not to invest too much capital where you're not making a profit with oil at a high price. Right now, it's come down considerably, mostly because China slowed down and Europe's going into recession. And that people think there might be a world recession, so the future price of oil is going down. Those things will reverse. And this underinvestment in oil and gas, it will hurt you 2 or 3 years out. That's quite predictable, but it's not today. And so we have time. I'm hoping the administration, they're looking at all these issues. I've spoken to John Podesta, now runs the IRA Act, about what we could do to accelerate, reduce CO2, but have better, cheaper, more secure energy, not just for us, but for our particular allies around the world. I think we need, I've called a Marshall Plan for energy, and that's got to be all the above and all the people involved.
But the IRA you referred to, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's just a sliver of what you're imagining for a Marshall Plan.
And that's it. That is a huge, we're still studying every piece of it for renewables and EVs and a lot of different things, but it's not just that. It's the infrastructure we're building, it's competition around the world, it's access to rare earths. When you dig into it, it's a really complex thing.
Those are the ingredients needed for electric vehicles that China has a monopoly on right now, essentially.
They have a monopoly in production, not on where it is. So we have rare earths in America.
Right.
Whether we can produce them here or not, because of certain laws and requirements, that's a different issue. We need to build grids. We don't get permissions to permits to build grids. So, one of the deals that was done between the president and Joe Manchin was the permitting bill. That permitting bill is for pipelines. We need to get gas to Louisiana, to get that Louisiana gas to Europe, to help our allies and reduce the cost there. That also reduces their coal usage. So it's very green if you look at it on the margin. And so it gets very complicated, and we just need to do the work.
Are people hearing what you're trying to explain in terms of market dynamics and investment?
Yeah. So I think it's sometimes justifiable when people talk across each other because damage was done. Damage was done in the financial crisis. Not all the big banks would have failed, and not everyone was equally guilty and all that. But and then of course people have simple political slogans that get them elected or something. But I think there's a lot of talk. We talk all the time to the Biden administration at multiple levels. And we should. I'm going to help any president try to do the best job for America, and those conversations are pretty intense.
You had said in this country you were happy about the midterm results.
On both parties, the wingnuts didn't get elected, and so the rational thing. When I was just in Congress, I was gratified by the thought they want to make progress, and I think they can make progress.
So we're days away from this government funding deadline. And Congress is going to have to pass a bill to avoid a shutdown. The risk is once power shifts come January that it could become
I would say government funding, look, it's not the way to
could be used as
it's not the way to run a railroad. Basically, they're spending much more money too, because the American public, I don't know, you pay people and then you pay them more to come back to work. It costs us much more money. So even if you want to be fiscally responsible, it's not a good idea. The debt ceiling is you talk about June of next year, and we'll deal with that later.
Right. Well, there's some debate about whether it should be done now in these last few weeks while Democrats still have control to avoid that kind of
They should, because the catastrophic effects of an actual default, not the debates, I understand both sides, how they want to use it, that's catastrophic or potentially catastrophic. I would never take that risk. So for me, yes, I'd get it done now. Take it off the table.
So you said back in 2019 on CNBC, my heart is Democratic, but my brain is kind of Republican. The world's changed a lot since 2019. I wonder what you were thinking right now.
I'm kind of the same place. I just think we need rational policy, really rational policy. And a lot of that policy is not Democrat or Republican. Getting proper infrastructure built is not Democrat or Republican. We should all acknowledge that inner city schools don't work particularly well in a lot of areas. Half the kids don't graduate. That's not Democratic or Republican. That's acknowledging the problem and then talking about solutions. Healthcare, we have the best in the world. Hell, I'm a beneficiary of it. But we also have some of the worst. It costs almost 20% of GDP, 50 million people uninsured, huge obesity, high blood pressure, a lot of things which are fixable. And I can go on and on and on. We need good policy. Good and no policy is sometimes bad policy.
Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute with more from our interview.